Yeah, I mean, if Dembele was fit, and that's the other one we didn't really mention. If Dembele
Yeah.
was there, um, you could get away without Ferran on the pitch, maybe. But without Dembele, you have to kind of put Ferran in there, probably as a central figure, because he's the only one that
Yeah.
gives you some semblance of Lewandowski, which is obviously not Lewandowski at all. But he at least is some kind of target that they can hit in the box. And this is one underrated thing about Barca is that Xavi loves crossing. They do it a lot,
Yeah.
and Lewandowski can capitalize on that. But Ferran is a different kind of player, and I'd be curious to see what they do there. The thing with Pedri, you mentioned a lot of the stuff of why he's important. Their record with and without Pedri is pretty jarring. Like the numbers don't lie. Like with him, they are almost flawless in their record, and without him, they're just a completely different team. And that's partly because he's a really great player. The drop off from him and Kessié has to be taken advantage of because it's a big drop off.
Yes.
Xavi has been doing this thing kind of which he found mid-season where he went away from the traditional 4-3-3, where he had two runners and wingers on each side, and kind of went with four central midfielders where Gavi, Pedri, De Jong, and Busquets, they would kind of play this nice interchangeable fluid thing on that left side and make different runs, and they would cover for each other. And with Pedri gone, I wonder how that functions. And I'm curious to ask you, Jose, what do you think would be uh what do you think will Xavi go with? Will he go with four central midfielders again? Obviously not having Dembele there kind of gives you another excuse to go away from the traditional 4-3-3. Or would you put Ansu on the left wing and Rafinha on the right, for example, and go with the more traditional 4-3-3? What do you think he'll do, and what do you think would suit Real Madrid more?
I think I would expect that he's going to do the four central midfielders thing again with Kessié kind of being there instead of Pedri, which of course is a massive drop off. But and the two main reasons I think about it is one, yes, Dembele is absent, so like there's just less incentive to play. Like you have it, when you have, for example, Dembele and Rafinha available. There are pros and cons to using them together, but like the pros are very powerful. They're just very powerful, like one versus one players. So they're very so it kind of makes sense to set up like that. But then with Ansu, of course, he's not in that good of a form. And if you put him in, then you kind of lose. Like if you look at the state of Barcelona's bench for this game, it's gonna be something. Let me see, Pablo Torre, maybe Ansu if he stays on the bench. Barca B player, Jordi Alba, Sergi Roberto, Eric Garcia. So the options on the bench are kind of limited. So in a way, still keep it, even if he's not doing at his best, it might pay off to just keep the Ansu bullet like on the bench in case some kind of game-changing sub is needed. I would say, by the way, the lack of more options from the bench, I would say it's a big reason United managed to make it past Barcelona in the tie, because Xavi's decisions were not ideal when doing that game management, but he also didn't have too many options. While say Ten Hag could bring Anthony off the bench, which yeah, like it's a far game changing option. So that does limit Barcelona's options a lot, and because of that, because of all that, I would imagine that Ansu is going to stay on the bench, and I would imagine that the lineup is going to be so. Backline is pretty much decided. It's going to be Ter Stegen. It's going to be Balde on the left. Araujo on the right as protection against Vinicius. Christensen and Koundé, the center back pairing. Because I think like the other interesting thing is that it's not just because Vinicius. I think Araujo is, of course, a very physical defender, but he struggles more with the kind of more technical and cerebral challenge that's posed by marking a guy like Benzema. Like you have to be sometimes smarter than stronger. So all in all, I think Koundé is a better fit to defend Benzema. Araujo is a better fit to defend Vinicius, and that's why the layout is be like for the Tico. The midfield, I would expect. So nominally, it's going to be like Busquets, Frenkie on the left most likely, because it's just like you want him to play on the left side because that's his preferred side. Kessie being kind of the leftover one put on the right, even though Kessie also plays better on the left normally, but you're not going to sacrifice Frankie for him. So Kessie likely on the right. And then I would assume that it's going to be something similar of like Gavi on the left wing, Rafinha on the right wing, and then Ferran as the 9. That's kind of the setup. I imagine that's nominally, of course. In possession, it's going to be kind of what I call like a 3-3 kind of lineup. So you're going to have Christensen, Koundé, Araujo at the back. You're going to have kind of the square of midfielders. So it's going to be like Frenkie and Busquets at the back, then Kessie and Gavi a bit more up front. And then you're going to have on the wings, Balde on the left, Rafinha on the right, and then Ferran in the center. That's what I'm imagining right now. It's going to be that Barca setup.
So a lot of interesting points made in there. The point about the bench is a big one that I think I haven't really seen anyone discuss yet. Is the fact that we have the bench mob in the second half that can come in and completely flip the game on its head. And Barca's depth is pretty. It's not great at this point in terms of people who can change the game off the bench. The Araujo Koundé point is also interesting too. One of the things I noted when I went back and I watched the first leg of Manchester United versus Barcelona at the Camp Nou was that because Araujo played on the right that game because they were trying to make sure Rashford doesn't have much space. So one of the things that was interesting about that is, well, Rashford had a great game anyway, but not having Araujo in the central defense, I think, also hurts them. So you kind of have to pick your poison. Weghorst was actually getting in behind their defense, behind Koundé, who was confused that entire game, basically, on where he's supposed to be. And that does open up room for Benzema. And this also takes us into discussion about how Real Madrid should line up. I'm curious to know what you think, because pretty much everyone available. A lot of the starters pick themselves. A lot of them don't. You know, Ancelotti was not too telling, but kind of telling in his press conference today, where he said it wouldn't be surprising if Modric and Kroos did not start in this game because we have options to go with younger, energetic legs. But if they do start, they have other advantages, like with their experience and the way they play. And he kind of was trying to kind of politically correct about it, but, like, you know, not trying to throw anyone under the bus. So to me, I interpreted it as like, I think at least one of them will sit. If I had to guess, I think only one of them would sit. I don't think he'll bench both of them. But it also begs the question about Rodrigo and Fede, because Ancelotti often prefers to go with Fede on the right wing. I kind of like the idea of Rodrigo in the game like this, just because if Araujo and Vinicius is going to be a battle, having Rodrigo come over to the left and overload that side and help create space and drag some defenders away, I think would help. Whereas Fede doesn't do that with his game usually. He's more stationary in his role as a box-to-box kind of right winger. I wanted to get your thoughts on that and how Real Madrid should line up in this game.
Yeah. So going through the lineup, and that's where I'm going to go through some of the like really nice points that you mentioned. So I think defensive line kind of picks itself given the given availability. So it's Carvajal, Militao, Rudiger, Nacho at left back, most surely. Then it's of course midfield and forward lines where the questions begin. If I had to take a guess, the certainties that I have, of course, Vinicius and Benzema. I have a feeling that Tchouaméni and Kroos are going to start, Fede too. The question is, because I think in a Clásico you have to start Fede for a number of reasons. So the question is, where will he play? Will it be in midfield? Will it be as the right winger? And of course, if he plays as the right winger, then who's going to be the third midfielder behind Tchouaméni and Kroos? That's what I imagine. Of course, there are other scenarios. Maybe the other scenarios could be maybe Ancelotti decides that he's really liked what he's seen up to now from Camavinga. He wants to use it instead of Tchouaméni. That is an option. But for now, I'm assuming that Tchouaméni and Kroos are going to start. And it's just then who is going to take up that right midfield role? Who's going to take that right winger role? And Those are really, to me, the big question marks in the lineup. For the right winger one, you already mentioned the options. It's really between Rodrigo and Fede. And I think you mentioned what I think there are trade-offs, of course, to playing Rodrigo as right wing. The pros of it is what you just mentioned about attack. So there's going to be the whole point about Rodrigo is that he's a right winger who doesn't really play on the right. So, and
Yeah.
that means that there are many situations where, yes, instead of, it helps a lot, like you mentioned, because Vinicius is not necessarily going to be, Vinicius and Benzema are not going to be isolated against Koundé and Araujo. It means that Rodrigo is going to move over there, and then you can have combinations and ways to get out of there. And then Rodrigo can also show up like behind the back of Frenkie de Jong and Busquets and like just overload that area. At there are many benefits to having Rodrigo there. The only drawback I would see is a bit more in defense, because one of the threats actually concerned about with Barcelona is Balde, because if you have a situation, because he's normally going to go a bit more against Carvajal, but just generally, you want the right winger to be a bit more disciplined, just in case that you have to deal with situations where, say, someone else wants to attract, say you have someone Gavi, say, wants to attract Carvajal, and then Balde wants to do like the overlapping run. You need the right winger there to be a bit more disciplined in those things. And of course, Fede would help in that more than Rodrigo. So the trade-off is defensive. And so I think this depends a lot. The decision depends a lot on what Ancelotti wants out of this. If he wants to be more respectful and more careful, like based on what happened last Clasico, let's say that Ancelotti wants to be more respectful, more defensive, just a bit more care, given that situation, then, okay, might go for Fede, think more about defense, try to block, for example, try to make sure that Balde, for example, doesn't end up overloading that zone. If you want to go more with the Liverpool, like the mentality that he went into with the Liverpool game, which is, this is the first leg, the leg here, let's just go and try to make it as offensive as possible, then you go with Rodrigo as your right wing option. It's going to be the better one for offense. Precisely because it allows Benzema and Vinicius not to be so isolated on the other side. I think that is basically the trade-off. Then, of course, if Fede plays right wing, then who would be the midfielder choice? I am not sure. That could be a tricky one. I tend to see Ceballos. I don't see it because, one, he would be very good as an impact sub, and two, it's a Kroos or Ceballos kind of thing. Like, because if Kroos runs the game, it's more difficult for Ceballos to run it. So all in all, the options, I guess, in that case could be like Modric or Camavinga. But all in all, I think the key decision is who do you want as your right winger, because that determines a lot the behavior of the team. Like, if you get Rodrigo, then you get the more offensive version. If you get Fede, it's the more defensive version of the team. So that's really that's really the decision that Ancelotti must make. Like, what kind of team do you want to be, and also like how much he wants to press, because that's also another complicated question going into this, because I feel like this Ancelotti team, especially in Clásicos, has felt more comfortable staying back. They stay back and hit on the counter. When they try to go and press a bit more, like it happened in La Supercopa, it doesn't go as well. So I'm also curious to see what's gonna happen. If I had to guess, this one is a bit hard to guess, because if the Liverpool game had happened, I would have told you for sure he's gonna go with Fede right wing and a more defensive plan. But after the Liverpool game, I'm not entirely sure.
Yeah, it's fascinating. It's a fascinating problem to have. There are so many good midfielders right now, and they're all good. Like, every single midfielder we have is good and has a case to earn more minutes. Like, every single one of them without exception. And that's what makes it such a fascinating problem, because in addition to that, we just both made the case for Rodrigo to start. Like, he would provide something really useful. So to me, I think the safer choice is for in Ancelotti's mind is probably to just bring Rodrigo off the bench. And because I think there are two in his head that probably won't be dropped. I'm like 95% sure that I think there's two midfielders that will start tomorrow, and that is one Camavinga, the other is Fede Valverde. And to create space for another midfielder, I think Fede will play right wing. And if I had to guess, I think it's going to be Tchouaméni, Camavinga, and Kroos is what he'll go with Fede on the right wing. I could be wrong, but I think Camavinga and Fede are kind of undroppable at this point, and Tchouaméni is your only pure anchor, like pure six. Although I think people will argue that Camavinga can do that too, and I wouldn't necessarily dispute it. But I think it's going to be Tchouaméni, Camavinga, Kroos with Fede on the right wing is my guess. But we'll see.